May 5, 1945. Inside an Austrian castle, American tank crews and Wehrmacht soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, rifles aimed at the same enemy. They were defending French politicians against SS troops in what would become known as the strangest battle of World War II. This is the story of how enemies became allies in the war's final hours. Schloss Itter dominated the Austrian landscape from its hilltop position, a medieval structure repurposed by the Nazi regime into something far more modern and sinister. The castle became a high-security detention center, though one with a peculiar distinction. It housed France's most prominent political prisoners, former prime ministers and military leaders who had opposed German expansion. These men lived under conditions that defied typical prisoner-of-war experiences, granted comfortable quarters yet denied any true liberty. Their meals were served on fine china, their rooms furnished adequately, but the heavy oak doors remained locked from the outside, and armed guards patrolled the corridors. The castle operated under an unspoken agreement between captors and captivus order would be maintained, basic dignities respected, but freedom remained an abstract concept. SS personnel enforced strict routines, conducting daily headcounts and limiting movement between castle sections. Prisoners could walk the inner courtyard during designated hours, but saw the same stone walls day after day. Windows offered panoramic views of the Tyrolean countryside, a constant reminder of the world beyond their reach. The very beauty of the location amplified their isolation, turning geography into another layer of confinement. These prisoners represented significant symbolic value to the Nazi regime, living trophies from conquered nations. As the war's tide turned against Germany, their existence became increasingly problematic for local commanders. The advancing Allied force created a dangerous dilemma, keeping these high-profile prisoners secure while also preventing their liberation. Orders from Berlin remained ambiguous, leaving castle staff uncertain whether to maintain custody, transfer prisoners deeper into Reich territory, or take more drastic measures as Soviet and American force is closed in. The castle's design created a security paradox. Its thick medieval walls and single access road provided excellent protection against outside assault, but also made escape virtually impossible. Attempt would face tremendous obstacles, while their captors knew defending the location against determined attackers would require substantial resources. This architectural reality created a standoff where neither side could alter the situation without external intervention. As artillery fire echoed from distant valleys in early May 1945, tension within the castle became palpable. Guards grew increasingly nervous, their professionalism giving way to anxious glances and hushed conversations. Prisoners noted the changing demeanor of their captors, recognizing that the war's conclusion might bring liberation or something far worse. The very value that had kept them relatively safe now made them potential targets for elimination by fanatical elements determined to leave no witness to the regime's final days. The situation created a peculiar form of suspense, where the approaching end of hostilities brought not reassurance but increased danger. These former statesmen and generals, accustomed to shaping policy and commanding armies, found themselves reduced to waiting passively as events unfolded beyond their control. Their survival would depend on decisions made by others, some enemies, some stranger, in the war's chaotic final hours. This strange limbo between captivity and potential execution set the stage for what would become one of history's most improbable military engagements. The prisoners, their guards, and the approaching force all moved toward a confrontation that defied conventional military logic. The castle's stone walls, which had stood for centuries, were about to witness a battle that would challenge every expectation of how enemies behave when the rules of war disintegrate. The first day of May 1945 brought the unmistakable sound of artillery fire echoing through the Austrian valleys, a constant reminder that the war's conclusion was approaching Schloss Itter. Inside the castle, both guards and prisoners tracked these distant engagements, each group interpreting the sounds through their own lens of hope or dread. The commandant and his staff faced a dilemma with no clear solution: remain at their posts and face certain capture by advancing Allied forces, or abandon their positions and risk execution by roaming SS squads hunting deserters. Their ultimate decision would transform the castle's circumstances entirely. In the pre-dawn darkness of May 4th, the German staff destroyed sensitive documents and departed through the castle's rear entrance without notifying the prisoners or leaving any explanation. The abandoned post represented both a dereliction of duty and an act of self-preservation, as these men chose potential survival over certain capture. Their disappearance left the castle in a state of suspended animation, with its occupants unaware that their captors had vanished. Morning light revealed the strange new reality. Prisoners emerged from their rooms to find no guards at their posts, no sentries in the courtyard, no officers conducting the morning count. The heavy main gate stood unsecured, its massive locking mechanism disengaged. For the first time in years, these men could walk freely through the castle grounds without requesting permission or receiving escorts. This sudden liberty brought not exhilaration, but profound unease, as they recognized their complete vulnerability in a collapsing regime's final ires. The castle's stocked pantry provided immediate physical sustenance, but no actual security. These former statesmen and military leaders now faced the practical challenges of their own survival without protection. They organized themselves into shifts to monitor the access road, posted lookouts in the castle's towers, and inventoried available food supplies. Their discussions focused on the immediate threats, not the advancing allies, but the fanatical SS units known to be operating throughout the region, eliminating those they considered traitors or inconvenient witnesses. This abandonment created a fundamental shift in the prisoners' status. From passive captives depending on their captors for both restraint and protection, they became active participants in their own survival. The castle that had been their prison now became their fortress to defend, but they possessed neither adequate weapons nor military training for sustained combat. Their value as high-profile prisoners made them targets rather than assets in the war's chaotic conclusion, and they understood that surrendering to the first arriving force might mean execution. Rather than liberation, the situation demanded immediate action beyond merely waiting for rescue. The prisoners recognized that without outside intervention, they would eventually face either starvation or assault by remaining Nazi elements. Their first collective decision marked a turning point rather than remain passive in their unprotected position. This resolution to act rather than wait set in motion events that would lead to one of the war's most improbable military engagements, beginning with a volunteer undertaking what seemed like a suicide mission through hostile territory. The castle's telephone line remained operational, providing their only connection to the outside world, but using it risked revealing their vulnerable position to monitoring authorities. They devised a plan that combined communication with direct action, understanding that conventional appeals through proper channels would arrive too late. Their strategy would require extraordinary courage from individuals willing to risk everything, beginning with a dangerous journey through uncertain territory where friend and foe had become indistinguishable. In the war's final disintegration, Andreas Krabat understood the assignment for what it truly was: a probable suicide mission. The Czech cook, imprisoned at Itter for forced labor, volunteered to carry the prisoner's desperate plea for help beyond the castle walls. His task was straightforward yet terrifying: find Allied forces and guide them back to the vulnerable castle. The prisoners had debated various options before settling on this direct approach, recognizing that conventional communication methods would likely arrive too late or be intercepted by hostile elements still controlling the area. Krabat's familiarity with the local roads and his civilian status made him the logical, if not ideal, candidate for this dangerous undertaking. He departed at first light, mounted on a single bicycle borrowed from the castle storage. The machine was sturdy but simple, its tires worn thin from years of use. He carried no weapons, no official papers, nothing that might identify his specific purpose if stopped. His only advantage was his appearance dressed in ordinary work clothes. He looked like any other civilian laborer moving between villages. This disguise provided his primary protection in a landscape where military personnel of all allegiances were stopping and questioning travelers with increasing frequency and suspicion. The roads radiating from Schloss Itter presented multiple hazards. SS patrols operated throughout the region, hunting deserters from the rapidly disintegrating German army. These fanatical units showed little patience for questioning traitors or obstacles. Checkpoints appeared without warning, often manned by nervous soldiers who might shoot first given any provocation. Krobot's journey required not just physical endurance, but constant mental calculation, judging which routes seemed safest, when to proceed openly and when to take concealed paths through fields and forests. He pedaled through villages where the signs of collapse were everywhere, evident abandoned military vehicles, burned out buildings, civilians hurriedly boarding up windows. The distant rumble of artillery grew steadily louder as he moved west, a constant reminder that front lines were shifting rapidly. At several points, he detoured around roadblocks by taking farm tracks through muddy fields, pushing his bicycle when the terrain became too difficult to ride. His progress was slow, measured not in kilometers covered, but in dangers successfully avoided. After hours of tense travel, Krobot reached the town of WWII, his clothes damp with sweat despite the cool spring air. Here he faced the most dangerous phase of his mission, making contact with unknown persons who might either help or betray him. He began asking cautious questions in shops and side streets, speaking quietly to those who appeared sympathetic. His inquiries were deliberately vague, seeking information about troop movements rather than directly requesting assistance. Each conversation carried immense risk, as the wrong word to the wrong person could mean immediate arrest or execution. The town itself was a study in transition. Some residents clearly hoped for Allied arrival, while others maintained wary silence, fearing both the departing German authorities and the approaching unknowns. Krobot moved through this uncertain environment with the careful posture of a man who understood that survival depended on reading subtle cues in expressions and conversations. His success now hinged on finding someone with both knowledge of Allied positions and willingness to help a stranger with a seemingly impossible story about imprisoned French politicians in a remote castle. This solitary bicycle journey created a fragile connection between the isolated castle and potential salvation. Krobot's ordinary appearance and quiet persistence became the thread upon which everything depended, a civilian undertaking what armies had failed to accomplish. His mission represented the war's peculiar initiative mattered more than military hierarchy, and survival often depended on chance encounters with strangers whose allegiances were as shifting as the front lines themselves. The cook's quiet courage set in motion a chain of events that would defy all conventional understanding of how the war's final chapter should unfold. Major Josef Gangl commanded what remained of Wehrmacht unit in the Tyrol region, soldiers who had sworn oaths to a regime now in its final collapse. This experienced officer watched as the military structure he had served disintegrated around him, creating a moral crisis that went beyond simple surrender. Gangl faced the realization that continued resistance served no military purpose. It would only get his men killed in defense of a cause that had already been lost. His command became an exercise in preventing unnecessary death rather than achieving victory. He had already established secret contact with Austrian resistance fighters in WRGL, recognizing that local knowledge would be essential for navigating the chaotic final days of occupation. These conversations focused on practical matters: to surrender honorably, how to protect Austrian towns from destruction, how to prevent SS units from using civilian areas as final battlegrounds. The discussions represented a fundamental shift from military objectives to humanitarian concerns, as soldiers and resistance members sought to minimize suffering as the war ended. When Andreas Krobot arrived with news of the abandoned VIP prisoners at Schloss Itter, Gangl immediately recognized the significance of the situation. Here was an opportunity that transcended mere surrender, a chance to protect Hive, Al, you prisoners from certain execution by fanatical SS elements still operating in the area. The Major understood that these French politicians represented not just lives to be saved, but historical continuity for a nation emerging from occupation. Their protection offered a path to redemption that went beyond laying down arms. Gangl assembled his most trusted soldiers, men who had followed him through years of combat, and now faced the war's strange conclusion. He presented them with a choice: participate in an unauthorized mission to defend former enemies against their own countrymen, or await capture by advancing Allied forces. The decision required these soldiers to redefine their understanding of duty and loyalty over military obedience in a situation without precedent. These Wehrmacht soldiers prepared to defend a castle containing men who had been officially designated as enemies just days earlier. They gathered available weapons and ammunition, knowing they would likely face better equipped and more numerous SS troops. Gangl's leadership transformed these defeated soldiers into protectors, giving them a final mission that held moral meaning beyond the conventional parameters of warfare. Their actions would create a temporary alliance that defied all standard military protocols. The Major understood the risks perfectly. Protecting these prisoners meant directly opposing SS units that showed no mercy to those they considered traitors. His decision placed his men in immediate danger while offering no guarantee of success. Yet the alternative, allowing the prisoners to be captured or executed, represented a moral failure that Gangl could not accept. This calculation between military risk and human obligation defined the extraordinary nature of his choice. Gangl's command vehicle became the operational center for planning the defense. Maps spread across hood and windshield as he coordinated with both his soldiers and local resistance contacts. They identified approach routes, potential defensive positions, and possible reinforcement options. The planning session had a surreal quality: German soldiers preparing to fight other German soldiers in defense of French prisoners, all while American forces advanced toward their position. This complexity required careful coordination and absolute trust among participants. The Major's leadership provided the essential element that made the defense possible: military expertise applied to an entirely unconventional situation. His understanding of terrain, tactics, and personnel management created a framework where former enemies could work together effectively. This professional competence, combined with moral conviction, would enable one of the war's most improbable military operations, transforming a group of defeated soldiers into determined protectors. Facing overwhelming odds, Captain Jack Lee Jr. as Sherman tanks rumbled through the Austrian countryside, their progress measured in cautious advances against sporadic resistance. His unit from the 23rd Tank Battalion, 12th Armored Division, encountered mostly abandoned positions and surrendering troops, but the threat of fanatical Lee's orders emphasized securing territory and maintaining forward momentum, not diverting resources for specialized operations. The war's conclusion created a peculiar operational environment where conventional military objectives blended with emerging humanitarian concerns. The appearance of German soldiers under white flag represented a scenario never covered in training manuals. Major Gangl's emissaries approached with careful formality, their uniforms clean but showing signs of recent combat. They presented their extraordinary request: German soldiers seeking American assistance to protect French prisoners from other German forces. Lee faced an immediate command dilemma that combined tactical, political, and moral dimensions. Trusting former enemies violated every standard protocol, an instinct developed through years of combat. Lee made the unconventional decision to accompany the Germans back toward the castle personally. He took one Sherman tank as escort, maintaining radio contact with his remaining forces. The journey provided opportunity to assess both the situation and the man making the request. Gangl's professional demeanor and clear reasoning suggested this was no trap but a genuine appeal for assistance. The two officers communicated through a combination of broken language and military professionalism, establishing a working relationship despite their recent status as opponents. Arriving at Castle Itter, Lee immediately recognized the strategic significance of the prisoners. These were not ordinary captives, but figures of historical importance whose rescue would have political value beyond immediate military considerations. The castle's defensive position offered advantages, but also vulnerabilities, walls but limited fields of fire, a single access road that could become a death trap if blocked. Lee conducted a rapid assessment while maintaining security against potential threats from multiple directions. His decision required balancing regulations against realities, authorizing cooperation with German force. He violated specific orders regarding fraternization and operational priorities. The military value of rescuing these specific prisoners justified extraordinary measures, but success remained uncertain. Lee calculated the risks against potential gains, understanding that failure could end his career while success might never receive official recognition. Committing his force is to a mission without clear authorization. The Sherman tanks provided essential elements the defense previously lacked: mobile firepower, armored protection, and reliable communication. Lee positioned his vehicles to cover the approach road while coordinating with Gangl's infantry for perimeter security. The American crew members worked alongside German soldiers to establish defensive positions, creating an integrated force structure that defied conventional military organization. Language barriers created challenge, is overcome through gestures and shared professional understanding. Lee's leadership created the framework for this unprecedented cooperation. He established clear command channels while respecting Gangl's knowledge of local conditions and enemy capabilities. The arrangement required mutual trust between recent enemies, built on professional respect rather than personal friendship. This practical alliance demonstrated how military professionals could transcend national animosities when faced with a common threat and shared objective. The tank commander's decision transformed the castle's defensive capabilities. What had been a vulnerable position with limited protection now possessed armored support and experienced leadership. Lee's tanks could engage targets at range while providing covering fire for infantry movements. Their presence also offered psychological advantages. Sight and sound of American armor would give pause to any attacking force. This reinforcement arrived precisely when the prisoner's situation appeared most desperate. Lee's authorization of this operation represented a calculated risk based on military necessity rather than emotional impulse. His assessment concluded that preventing these prisoners' capture or execution justified unconventional measures. The tank's deployment created a defensive capability that might withstand determined assault until larger forces could arrive. This decision would enable one of the war's most improbable military engagements, where former enemies would fight side by side against a common threat. The French prisoners watched from the castle's windows as American soldiers and Wehrmacht troops arrived together, a sight that defied all logic of the preceding war years. These former prime ministers and generals observed the mixed force establishing defensive positions around their medieval prison to cautious acceptance of this unprecedented situation. The castle's courtyard became an operational center where recent enemies coordinated their efforts with professional efficiency, creating a defensive perimeter that blended American armor with German infantry experience. This newly formed alliance immediately began preparing for the expected assault. Soldiers from opposing armies distributed weapons from the castle's armory, passing rifles and ammunition to men they would have been trying to kill just days earlier. The weapons exchange occurred without ceremony, but with clear understanding of their shared purpose. Language barriers created occasional confusion during these preparations, resolved through gestures and the few soldiers who possessed basic knowledge of each other's languages. This communication challenge added another layer of complexity to an already extraordinary military situation. The French VIP, despite their advanced age and political status, insisted on participating in the defense. These former government ministers and military commanders recognized that their survival depended on every available person contributing to the effort. They accepted rifles with determination, their hands more accustomed to holding pens than weapons. They took up positions alongside the soldiers, their civilian clothing contrasting sharply with military uniforms. This integration of non-combatants into the defense force demonstrated the absolute necessity of the situation. The castle's telephone line became the strategic nerve center of the operation. A French prisoner maintained constant communication with Austrian resistance contacts, relaying information about enemy movements and potential reinforcement routes. This fragile connection provided the only link to the outside world, with every call carrying the risk of detection by monitoring services. The telephone's black receiver became the most valuable weapon in their arsenal, allowing coordination beyond the castle walls despite the surrounding danger. Every person involved understood the consequences of capture. SS troops showed no mercy to those they considered traitors, and this mixed force of Americans, Germans, and French politicians represented the ultimate betrayal in their eyes. This shared understanding created a bond that transcended national allegiances, unifying the defenders through common peril rather than common cause. A temporary suspension of ideological conflict in favor of basic human survival, the defensive preparations continued through the remaining daylight hours. Soldiers reinforced gates, established firing positions in the towers, and created ammunition distribution points throughout the castle. The American tanks positioned to cover the approach road, their guns trained on the forest edge where threat would likely emerge. German soldiers directed these placements based on their knowledge of local terrain and enemy tactics. This collaboration created a defense that leveraged the strengths of each contingent. The coming night brought increased tension as visibility decreased and the sounds of distant engagements grew nearer. Sentries reported movements in the surrounding woods, though whether friend or foe remained uncertain. The mixed force maintained their positions, their vigilance heightened by the knowledge that attack could come at any moment. This waiting period tested the resolve of every defender, from experienced soldiers to elderly politicians holding weapons for the first time in decades. This ad hoc coalition represented a fundamental reordering of military relationships under extreme circumstances. Former enemies now shared food, ammunition, and defensive responsibilities, their cooperation born not from political agreement, but from practical necessity. The castle's stone walls contained a microcosm of the war's complexity, where traditional alliances had been temporarily set aside for shared survival. Their unusual partnership would face its ultimate test with the first light of morning, when the expected assault would determine whether this improbable alliance could withstand professional military attack. Morning light revealed movement in the forest edge surrounding Schloss Itter, shadows shifting between trees as figures advanced with professional spacing and purpose. The SS troops moved with the disciplined coordination of experienced soldiers, their uniforms distinct from the regular army force, as the defenders had previously encountered. These were Waffen-SS, the political soldiers known for fanatical loyalty to the Nazi regime even as the war collapsed around them. Their advance signaled the beginning of the confrontation everyone had anticipated, transforming the castle from sanctuary to battlefield. The attacking force numbered over 100 soldiers equipped with automatic defenders' capabilities. They immediately deployed their most formidable Aceton 88mm flak gun, positioned to target the castle's main gate. This artillery piece could destroy medieval stonework with methodical precision, its reputation earned on battlefields across Europe. The gunners worked with efficient movements, preparing the weapon for action, while infantry established firing positions in the surrounding terrain. The defenders counted fewer than 20 combat-effective personnel against this professional assault force. The American tanks provided mobile firepower but limited infantry support, their crews constrained by vehicle configurations designed for open battle rather than defensive siege. The German soldiers and French prisoners distributed themselves along the castle walls, each person covering sectors with rifles and limited ammunition. Their positions offered some protection, but could not withstand sustained assault from determined professionals. The SS commander delivered a surrender demand through a loudspeaker, his voice echoing across the courtyard with cold precision. He promised no quarter would be given to those he labeled traitors and collaborators. Every defender understood the meaning of these words. Capture meant immediate execution without formalities or prisoner status. The French politicians recognized their particular vulnerability as high-value targets for elimination. The mixed force of Americans and Germans faced equal danger as participants in what the SS considered ultimate betrayal. The battle began without further negotiation. The 88 mm gun fired its first round against the castle's main gate, the impact sending stone fragments cascading across the courtyard. The thunderous report echoed through the valley, announcing the start of the engagement to any force is within hearing distance. Return fire came immediately from the American tanks and defending infantry, their weapons creating a disparate symphony of calibers and report patterns. The castle's ancient walls provided protection, but also limited fields of fire for the defenders. SS infantry advanced using covering fire from machine guns positioned in the tree line. Their movements demonstrated professional training, utilizing available cover while maintaining pressure on the defense perimeter. The attackers recognized the vulnerability of the tank crews, focusing fire on vision slots and the Sherman commanders responded with coaxial machine guns and main gun rounds where viable targets presented themselves. The defenders faced the reality of their ammunition limitations. Each rifle shot needed to count, with no resupply available once their current stocks depleted. The French prisoners, inexperienced in combat, learned quickly under fire, their former political rivalries forgotten in the immediate struggle for survival. Language barriers created occasional confusion in target designation, resolved through gestures and shared understanding of the common threat. The SS assault continued with determined intensity, their fanaticism evident in willingness to take risks regular army units would have avoided. They attempted to scale walls using grappling hooks while maintaining suppressing fire against defender positions. The ancient architecture worked both for and against the castles. Occupants' thick walls provided protection, but multiple access points required constant vigilance. This initial assault established the pattern for the coming hours. Professional attackers employing conventional siege tactics against a desperate, mixed force with limited resources. The strange alliance faced its ultimate test under fire, their cooperation no longer theoretical, but a matter of immediate survival. The outcome would depend on marksmanship, courage, and the timely arrival of assistance that might never come. Major Gangl moved steadily between defensive positions along the castle walls, his presence providing the essential coordination between American tankers, German soldiers, and French civilians. The Major's leadership had become the crucial element maintaining cohesion among these disparate groups, his fluency in English and military experience allowing him to translate commands and adjust tactics under fire. He moved with purpose, checking ammunition levels, directing fire against specific threats, and maintaining communication between sectors. His calm demeanor provided stability as the SS assault intensified, creating order where chaos might otherwise have prevailed. The forest surrounding the castle contained hidden threats beyond the visible assault forces. SS snipers had infiltrated the tree line, their positions carefully chosen to cover approach routes and defender positions. These trained marksmen targeted key figures in the defense, understanding that eliminating their patience proved more dangerous than the frontal assault, waiting for opportunities to strike with single, precise shots rather than volume of fire. The defenders knew these shooters existed, but could not pinpoint their locations without exposing themselves to return fire. Gangl positioned himself near the courtyard's edge to direct fire against the 88 mm gun crew that threatened the main gate. The artillery piece represented the most immediate danger to the castle's structural integrity, its rounds capable of breaching the medieval walls. The Major exposed himself briefly to better assess the situation, standing partially visible to coordinate targeting. This momentary vulnerability provided the opportunity the snipers had been waiting for, their patience rewarded with a clear shot at the defense, his central figure. A single rifle shot echoed from the forest, distinct from the automatic weapons fire and artillery reports. The round struck Gangl in the head, killing him instantly. His body collapsed near the courtyard wall, the suddenness of the event leaving surrounding defenders momentarily stunned. The major's death created immediate confusion among the German soldiers who had followed him into this unconventional mission. Their chain of command dissolved in that instant, leaving experienced soldiers without clear direction at a critical moment. The precision of the shot demonstrated the SS' continued professionalism even in the war's final days. This wasn't random fire, but targeted elimination of a key opponent, showing tactical understanding of the defense's structure. The sniper's effectiveness underscored the quality of the opposition faced by the mixed force, reminding everyone that they fought determined professionals rather than disorganized remnants. This reality heightened the sense of vulnerability among defenders already facing overwhelming odds. American tank commanders now had to coordinate directly with German soldiers without their intermediary. The language barrier created immediate complications in translating commands and understanding tactical suggestions. Tank crews communicated through hatches with gestures and simplified terms, while German infantry adapted to receiving orders from foreign officers. This improvised communication slowed responses and created potential for misunderstanding during a rapidly evolving battle. Gangl's death transformed the military operation to a personal struggle for survival. The moral commitment that had brought these forces together now became a matter of honoring his sacrifice. Defenders fought with renewed determination, understanding that failure would render his death meaningless. This emotional shift cemented the alliance more firmly than any strategic calculation could have achieved. The loss removed the officer who had conceived and organized this unprecedented cooperation. His vision of transcending traditional animosities for human preservation now depended on those he had brought together. The defenders continued fighting with the grim understanding that their survival depended on maintaining the unity he had created. Their cooperation became his legacy, tested under fire without his guiding presence. This turning point demonstrated how individual leadership could shape events, even in the midst of larger historical forces. Gangl's decision to prioritize human lives over military obedience had created this unusual alliance, and his death reinforced its necessity. The battle continued with increased intensity, but now driven by personal commitment rather than professional duty. The defenders understood they fought not just for their own survival, but to validate the Major's extraordinary vision of enemies becoming allies. Jean Borotra surveyed the deteriorating situation from his position along the castle wall. The former tennis champion turned government minister recognized the mathematical certainty of their position, diminishing ammunition against increasing enemy pressure. He approached the American commander with a proposal that seemed to defy military logic but leveraged his unique capabilities. Borotra would attempt to sprint through SS lines to personally guide reinforcements to the castle, understanding that telephone communications could provide general information but not the precise navigation needed through confusing mountain roads. His athletic background made this desperate plan marginally viable where it would have been suicide for others. Borotra had won Wimbledon and other major tournaments, his physical conditioning honed through years of elite competition. That training now served a purpose far removed from tennis courts and cheering crowds. He prepared for the attempt by studying the terrain during lulls in fighting, identifying potential routes through the forested slopes. The defenders organized covering fire to support his breakout. American tank crews and German soldiers coordinated their weapons to create a temporary suppression of enemy positions along the planned escape route. This cooperation between recent enemies demonstrated the complete transformation of relationships under extreme circumstances. Their combined fire created a window of opportunity measured in seconds rather than minutes, requiring perfect timing from both the covering forces and the runner. Borotra chose his moment as the suppression fire reached its peak intensity. He launched from the castle gate with the explosive acceleration that had once defeated opponents on grass courts, his movement immediately drawing enemy fire. SS troops recognized the significance of this attempted breakout and shifted weapons to engage the solitary figure sprinting across open ground. Bullets kicked up dirt around his feet as he maintained his pace, his athletic training overriding natural instinct to seek cover. The forest edge offered temporary concealment, but new dangers. Baratra navigated the wooded terrain with careful urgency, using natural features for protection while maintaining direction toward American positions. Pursuing SS soldiers entered the forest after him, their progress slowed by equipment and less familiarity with moving through dense vegetation. The chase became a test of endurance and woodcraft, with the tennis champion's conditioning providing advantage over his militarily trained pursuers. Hours of strenuous travel through difficult terrain drained his energy reserves. Baratra moved with deliberate caution when near roads or settlements, avoiding contact with any personnel until reaching confirmed American positions. His civilian clothing and lack of weapons made identification problematic, requiring careful approach to avoid being mistaken for an enemy combatant. The physical exhaustion from his escape compounded the mental strain of navigating through uncertain territory. He finally encountered American forward elements who initially regarded him with suspicion. His explanation of the situation at Castle Itter seemed too extraordinary for immediate belief, but his detailed knowledge of military terminology and specific unit information established credibility. Baratra provided precise details about defender positions, enemy strength, and optimal approach routes that with equivalent accuracy. This first-hand intelligence transformed the relief operation from general assistance to targeted rescue mission. The successful completion of this dangerous journey demonstrated how individual initiative could alter military outcomes. Baratra's athletic prowess, developed for sporting achievement, became instrumental in survival and rescue. His knowledge of the terrain and ability to convey specific tactical information enabled the relief force to plan their approach with precision unavailable through other means. This personal guidance would prove crucial in reaching the castle before the defenders exhausted their limited resources. Captain Lee's Sherman tank offered the defenders their only mobile firepower. A single armored vehicle facing an enemy equipped with superior artillery, the M4 Sherman, reliable in open combat, now operated in confined terrain that limited its advantages. Its 75mm main gun engaged the German 88mm flak weapon in a duel that would determine whether the castle's gates held or fell. This confrontation pitted American armor against one of the war's most feared anti-tank weapons, a mismatch in range and penetration that demanded exceptional tactical handling. Lee utilized the narrow approach roads for protection, maneuvering the Sherman into positions that minimized exposure to the 88 MMS line of fire. The tank's movements became a careful dance between delivering effective return fire and avoiding catastrophic hits. Each time the Sherman fired, its position was revealed, requiring immediate relocation before the German gunners could adjust their aim. This constant shifting consumed precious time and fuel while testing the crew's coordination under sustained pressure. The tank absorbed multiple impacts that degraded its combat effectiveness. A hit damaged the tracks, reducing mobility and limiting repositioning options. Another strike compromised the optics, forcing the crew to rely on secondary sighting systems with reduced accuracy. These damage is accumulated gradually, each incident reducing the vehicle's capability while increasing crew fatigue. The Sherman continued fighting despite these impairments, its continued operation becoming as much psychological as physical. Infantry attacks forced the crew to button up, sealing the hatches against small arms fire. This protection came at the cost of situational awareness and sound cues. The coaxial machine gun became their primary weapon against close assaults, its tracer rounds cutting through attackers attempting to approach the vehicle. These engagements occurred at point-blank range, with SS troops using the terrain to close distance before launching their attacks. Ammunition stores dwindled as the engagement continued through the morning hours. The crew counted remaining rounds for both the main gun and machine guns, recognizing that resupply was impossible. Each shot required careful consideration of target value versus his conservation needs. The tank's presence alone maintained a psychological advantage, its silhouette and engine noise creating hesitation among attackers considering a full assault on the main gate. This deterrent effect proved as valuable as its actual firepower. The damaged Sherman represented both vulnerability and resilience. Its impaired mobility forced static defensive positioning, yet its continued operation demonstrated determination against worsening odds. Crew members performed emergency repairs between engagements, knowing that complete mechanical failure would eliminate their most effective defensive asset. Their efforts maintained the tank's functionality through improvisation and sheer determination. This armored standoff created a crucial delay in the SS assault timetable. The continued threat from the Sherman forced attackers to devote resources to neutralizing it rather than overwhelming the castle's infantry defenders. This diversion of enemy effort provided the breathing space needed for the mixed force to maintain their positions. The tank's damaged but operational status became the linchpin of the entire defense strategy. Lee's leadership inside the confined turret space involved constant decision-making under extreme conditions. He balanced the need to engage targets with the necessity of preserving ammunition and avoiding fatal damage. His commands directed not only his crew, but influenced the entire defensive effort, with other defenders coordinating their actions based on the tank's movements and engagements. This responsibility extended beyond his official command to include the strange coalition fighting for survival. The Sherman's continued operation through damage and diminishing resource bought the precious hours needed for reinforcement. Its presence maintained defensive cohesion even as its armored vehicle, designed for open warfare, found its ultimate purpose in a confined medieval setting, protecting an unprecedented alliance against overwhelming opposition. The tank's endurance under fire would prove decisive in the battle's final outcome. While bullets chipped away at the castle's ancient stonework, a single French prisoner remained fixed at his station. Before a black telephone receiver, this simple electrical connection became the strategic nerve center of the entire defense, its importance rivaling any weapon in the castle. The prisoner maintained contact with Austrian resistance fighters who served as intermediaries, relaying messages to American headquarters regarding their desperate situation. Each conversation carried significant risk, as enemy monitoring might detect their position or intercept critical information, yet silence would mean abandonment and certain defeat. The telephone provided real-time updates on reinforcement progress, allowing defenders to calculate their survival odds against diminishing ammunition supplies. Off-site observers used the line to report enemy movements and suggest targeting adjustments for the American tanks. This coordination enabled precise defensive fire despite the attackers' numerical advantage. The constant communication maintained morale during the most intense fighting, providing psychological reassurance that help was advancing toward them. SS troops recognized the telephone's strategic value and attempted to sever this vital connection. They searched for the line's external routing, expecting to find vulnerable above-ground wiring. The castle's construction frustrated these efforts. Telephone line ran through protected channels within censure, these old stone walls, immune to simple sabotage attempts. This architectural advantage preserved their link to the outside world when isolation would have meant collapse. The resistance fighters on the other end of the line became essential partners in the defense strategy. They translated messages, verified information, and maintained contact with advancing American units. This coordination required careful communication protocols to prevent misunderstandings that might jeopardize the entire operation. The telephone's continued operation demonstrated how conventional technology could achieve extraordinary results when integrated into unconventional tactics. This communication lifeline resistance to coordinated operation. The telephone allowed defenders to time their actions with external developments, conserving resources until most needed. It provided early warning of enemy movements and coordinated firing solutions that maximized their limited ammunition. The psychological impact proved equally important, maintaining hope that reinforcement would arrive before their position became untenable. The telephone's significance extended beyond military utility to symbolic meaning. Its continued operation represented maintenance of rational communication amid chaos, a connection to normalcy in extraordinarily abnormal circumstances. This simple device enabled the defense to function as a coordinated unit despite complete physical isolation, proving that technology could bridge gaps that geography and combat created. The constant communication created an information advantage that partially offset the defender's numerical disadvantage. Knowledge of reinforcement progress allowed calculated risks, taking and resource allocation that would have been impossible without external updates. This strategic awareness transformed their defense from desperate resistance to managed engagement with clear objectives and timelines. The telephone's resilience under fire demonstrated how conventional infrastructure could sustain extraordinary circumstances. Its operation throughout the battle provided a constant through-line of communication that connected multiple elements: defenders, resistance fighters, and advancing relief forces. This coordination would prove decisive in the battle's final moments, enabling precisely timed intervention that turned certain defeat into unlikely victory. This communication system represented the defense's strategic foundation, enabling coordination that transcended language barriers and organizational differences. The telephone proved as valuable as any weapon in the castle, its importance demonstrated through sustained operation under fire and continued utility throughout the engagement. Its role in the defense would be remembered as crucial to the outcome, a simple technology serving extraordinary purpose in the war's final hours. The relief column began its advance immediately. After receiving Borutra's detailed report, American tanks and infantry moving along narrow Austrian roads with urgent purpose. Their mission represented a fundamental shift from requiring rapid movement through potentially hostile territory. The difficult mountain terrain presented natural obstacles compounded by possible enemy ambushes at every turn. Each minute of delay increased the probability that they would arrive too late to prevent the castle's fall. Borutra's first-hand knowledge transformed the operation from general advance to precise navigation. His memory of the fastest routes and potential obstacles enabled the column to maintain momentum where uncertainty might have caused dangerous hesitation. This guidance proved particularly valuable at intersections and bypass routes where conventional maps offered insufficient detail. The tennis champion's unusual combination of athletic endurance and tactical awareness became the expedition's navigational foundation. Austrian resistance fighters emerged from villages and forest paths to provide additional guidance. These local contacts identified SS checkpoints and roadblocks ahead, allowing the column to circumvent prepared defensive positions. Their assistance demonstrated how the war's conclusion had transformed relationships between occupying forces and civilian populations. This cooperation enabled the relief force to avoid engagements that would have consumed precious time and resources. Sporadic resistance still occurred despite these precautions. Isolated SS units fired on the column from concealed positions, requiring temporary stops to return fire and clear threats. These delays created mounting frustration among soldiers who understood the critical timing of their mission. The sounds of distant battle growing louder with each kilometer advanced emphasized the urgency of their progress. Forward observers confirmed active combat at the castle through binoculars and sound ranging, their reports amplifying the column's determination. The relief commander pushed his men beyond normal operational limits, understanding that conventional pacing would achieve failure. Tanks maintained speeds that tested mechanical reliability on winding mountain roads. Infantry marched at rates that drained energy reserves normally conserved for combat. This extraordinary effort reflected the recognition that arrival time would determine survival or annihilation for the castle's defenders. The advancing Americans represented the defenders' only hope against overwhelming odds. Their progress became a race against the weakening defensive capabilities. Each kilometer gained meant increased chance of intervention before collapse. The mathematical reality was brutally simpler. Too slow meant finding only bodies and ruins. The column's movement created its own tactical challenges. Armored vehicles provided protection, but also presented large targets on narrow roads. Infantry provided security, but required careful coordination with vehicle movement. The mixed force had to maintain combat readiness while moving rapidly, a difficult balance that demanded constant alertness from every soldier. Dust rose from the column's progress, visible evidence of their approach that might alert enemy observers. The sound of engines and marching troops announced their coming long before visual contact. This unavoidable noise created tension between speed and stealth, with commanders accepting detection risk to maintain pace. The relief force, its composition reflected the urgency of their mission: tanks for assault power, infantry for perimeter security, all moving with single purpose. Their advance demonstrated how military resources could be redirected from conventional objectives to humanitarian mission when circumstances demanded. This flexibility would prove crucial to the operation's success. Their progress marked the final phase of the castle's defense story, the answering movement to a desperate plea for help. The distance between advancing rescuers and besieged defenders closed with each passing minute, creating the possibility of intervention before final defeat. This race against time would determine whether extraordinary cooperation would achieve salvation or become historical footnote. Early afternoon on May 5th brought the SS final, most determined assault. Over 100 Waffen-SS troops concentrated their efforts with systematic precision, launching a coordinated attack that combined heavy weapons barrages with aggressive infantry advances. Automatic weapons fire hammered the castle's main gate, chewing away at the ancient wood and stone, while teams of soldiers attempted to scale the walls using ropes and improvised climbing gear. This two-pronged approach stretched the defenders dangerously thin, forcing them to divide their attention between multiple, simultaneous threats. The defenders faced this intensified assault with nearly exhausted resources. Many rifles held only final magazines. Before each engagement, the American tank crew fired their last shells against concentrated assault groups, making every shot count against the most pressing threats. Their main gun fell silent after the final round, leaving only coaxial machine guns to continue the fight. This reduction in firepower created immediate vulnerability along the perimeter. Wehrmacht soldiers transitioned to bayonets and hand-to-hand combat as ammunition depletion forced adaptation. These experienced fighters used the castle's architectural features to create killing zones where close-quarters weapons could be effective despite numerical disadvantage. Their training in infantry tactics provided crucial advantage in these confined spaces, where movement and positioning mattered more than firepower. The French prisoners, many holding weapons for the first time, learned through desperate necessity. Former politicians and ministers adjusted their grip on rifles, aimed at moving targets, and fired with increasing competence as the battle progressed. Their participation transformed them from passive captives to active defenders, their civilian clothing increasingly stained with gunpowder and dust. This strange sight of elderly statesmen fighting alongside soldiers underscored the battle's extraordinary nature. The 88mm gun finally achieved its objective, breaching the outer gate with a direct hit that shattered the heavy wooden barrier. The explosion sent splinters and stone fragments across the courtyard, creating temporary confusion among the defenders. However, the inner keep remained intact, its medieval construction proving resistant even to the powerful artillery piece. This partial success allowed SS troops to penetrate the outer perimeter while maintaining the defensive value of the castle's central structure. Hand-to-hand combat erupted in the courtyard as SS soldiers surged through the breached gateway. The fighting became intimate and brutal, with rifle butts, knives, and entrenching tools employed at close range. The mixed force of Americans, Germans, and French civilians fought as a cohesive unit despite their diverse backgrounds, their cooperation forged through hours of shared danger. This physical struggle represented the ultimate test of their unusual alliance. The SS troops fought with the desperation of men who knew the war was lost but remained committed to their cause. Their attacks showed professional training, creating a formidable opponent even for experienced soldiers. The defenders recognized that surrender remained impossible. Capture meant execution without exception based on the SS commander's explicit warning. This final push represented the attackers' maximum effort to eliminate the prisoners and their protectors. The outcome remained uncertain as both sides fought with ultimate determination. The battle balanced between collapse and survival. The defenders' position became increasingly precarious as more SS troops entered the courtyard, their numerical advantage becoming more telling in the confined fighting space. The sounds of battle within the castle walls created a cacophony of weapons fire, shouted commands, and the impacts of close combat. This intense struggle would determine whether the extraordinary cooperation between former enemies would achieve salvation or become a historical footnote in the war's final hours. The defenders' resilience against overwhelming force demonstrated the power of shared purpose even among those who had recently been opponents. The sound of approaching armored vehicles echoed through the valley as the battle reached its breaking point. American reinforcements appeared along the access road, their arrival timed to the defenders' most desperate moment. The relief force deployed immediately into attack formation, recognizing the ongoing combat from visible muzzle flashes and smoke rising from the castle grounds. Their urgent engagement began without detailed briefing, requiring immediate action based on limited understanding of friendly positions and enemy deployment. Opening volleys from American tanks struck SS positions on the slopes surrounding the castle. High explosive rounds impacted among the tree lines where enemy machine guns and the 88mm artillery piece had been positioned. The sudden attack from an unexpected direction created immediate confusion among the assaulting troops, who had focused entirely on the castle's defenses. This new threat forced rapid reassessment of tactical situations that had seemed nearly resolved in their favor. SS commanders faced an impossible tactical dilemma with the arrival of fresh forces. Continuing their assault meant fighting on two fronts against reinforced opposition. Withdrawing represented failure to complete their primary objective of eliminating the hive. You prisoners. With limited information about the strength and composition of the arriving American units. The element of surprise worked decisively against the attackers, disrupting their coordination and momentum. Defenders inside the castle heard the distinctive report of American weapons mixing with the familiar sounds of German arms. This confirmation that reinforcement had arrived provided immediate psychological boost to troops facing ammunition exhaustion and possible defeat. They launched their final counterattack, pushing from the castle gates with renewed determination despite their depleted state. This aggressive movement from the defenders created a pincer effect against the SS positions. The attacking force found themselves trapped between the castle's defenders and the advancing relief column. Their positions on the slopes offered limited protection against fire from multiple directions. The coordinated pressure from both forces shattered the assault's cohesion, with individual SS soldiers seeking cover or escape routes rather than maintaining offensive action. The complex attack plan disintegrated into individual survival efforts as command control broke down. The relief force, its infantry advanced alongside the tanks, providing targeting information and engaging enemy positions with small arms fire. Their movement up the access road systematically cleared resistance points that had threatened the castle's perimeter. This ground advance complemented the armored vehicles' firepower, creating a comprehensive assault that overwhelmed the remaining SS troops. The combination of precise and area weapons proved devastating against the already engaged attackers. The battle's conclusion came with sudden completeness once the tide turned. SS troops who moments before had been pressing their attack now sought surrender or escape. The relief force accepted surrenders while continuing to engage those who resisted. The transformation from intense combat to orderly capture occurred within minutes, the violence ending as abruptly as it had begun hours earlier. The timely arrival of American reinforcements converted certain defeat into unexpected victory. Their intervention demonstrated how relatively small forces could achieve decisive results when applied at the critical moment against engaged opponents. The relief operations succeeded through combination of urgency, firepower, and tactical surprise. Arriving precisely side by side, now faced the awkward transition from combat cooperation to the realities of peace. They moved through the courtyard, collecting weapons and assisting wounded comrades, their interactions marked by a mixture of professional respect and uncertain protocol. These men had shared extreme danger across language barriers and former animosities, creating bonds that military regulations never anticipated. Their cooperation had achieved what seemed impossible hours earlier, but now required navigation of uncharted post-combat relationships. Captain Jack Lee immediately began organizing the evacuation of the French VIP to safer locations. His priority shifted from combat command to protection detail, recognizing that the prisoners remained vulnerable despite the battle's conclusion. The damaged Sherman tank, disabled by the 88 mm gun during the final assault, served as a reminder of how close they had come to failure. Its crew had been successfully rescued, but the vehicle's condition demonstrated the intensity of the opposition they faced. The battle had lasted less than a single day, yet felt like eternity to the participants. The intensity of the experience left psychological marks that would endure beyond physical injuries. Soldiers moved with the deliberate slowness of extreme fatigue, their uniforms stained with sweat and dirt, their faces etched with the strain of prolonged combat. The relative quiet felt unnatural after hours of weapon, reports, and shouted commands, creating a disorienting contrast to the earlier chaos. Documentation began almost immediately as officers recognized the historical significance of what had occurred. Military reports were compiled detailing the unusual circumstances of the battle, recording the unprecedented cooperation between recent enemies. These documents would eventually become legendary within military archives, though their initial creation served practical purposes of accountability and command reporting. The process involved collecting statements from participants through interpreters, creating a multifaceted record of the extraordinary event. The immediate aftermath revealed that success had come with permanent loss. Major Gangl's death represented the ultimate sacrifice in an operation he had conceived and led, his vision of transcending traditional military boundaries realized at personal cost. With the knowledge the wounded defenders resulted from protecting former enemies against their own countrymen. This shared experience created connections that would bind the survivors across national lines for years to come. The mixed force that had defended the castle now divided along conventional lines as practical necessities took precedence. German soldiers prepared for formal surrender procedures, while American troops secured the area against potential counterattack. The French prisoners received protection and assistance for their return to normal life after years of captivity. These separations began the process of returning to established military and political structures, yet the memory of their cooperation would remain with all participants. The castle itself stood as silent witness to these transitions, its medieval walls containing the evidence of both conflict and extraordinary cooperation. The battle's conclusion marked not just a military victory, but a demonstration of human flexibility under extreme circumstances. The defenders had achieved something beyond conventional warfare, creating a temporary alliance that defied the established categories of friend and enemy during history's most destructive conflict. Military historians examining the Battle of Castle Itter face a classification challenge without clear precedent. This engagement defied the established narratives of World War II allegiance, creating an anomaly that resists easy categorization within conventional military history frameworks. The event stands isolated from standard operational records, a singular occurrence where traditional enemy lines blurred beyond recognition under extreme circumstances. Official documentation from the period reveals careful treatment of the German participation. Military reports often minimize the Wehrmacht soldiers' role to avoid complicating surrender narratives during the war's immediate aftermath. This selective recording reflected practical concerns about maintaining clear distinctions between victors and vanquished during the transition to peace. The paperwork emphasized American actions while downplaying the collaborative nature of the defense, creating an incomplete historical record that would require decades to fully correct. Captain Jack Lee received the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions, the citation highlighting his extraordinary heroism, without detailing the unusual standard procedures for valor awards while avoiding complicated explanations about cooperating with former enemies. The decoration acknowledged individual courage without addressing the larger implications of the temporary alliance, maintaining focus on conventional military achievements. Major Josef Gangl gained posthumous recognition from both Austrian and French authorities for his decisive role in the defense. These acknowledgments came through informal channels rather than official military decorations, reflecting the ambiguous status of his actions. Austrian resistance groups remembered his cooperation with their movement, while French officials expressed gratitude for his protection of their political leaders. This bilateral recognition demonstrated how his actions transcended national military frameworks. The French government maintained careful discretion regarding the battle, quietly expressing gratitude while managing political sensitivities. Former prisoners returning to public life avoided detailed discussion of their German protectors, focusing instead on their American rescuers. This selective commemoration reflected the complex process of national reconciliation after occupation, where acknowledging German assistance presented complications for rebuilding national identity. For decades, the complete story remained known primarily to participants and specialist historians. Standard historical surveys of World War II's final days made no mention of the event, while those aware of the incident often treated it as a curious outlier rather than a significant historical occurrence. This limited awareness prevented broader understanding of the battle's implications for studying military cooperation across ideological lines. Modern research has gradually revealed the full complexity of this extraordinary event through archival research and participant interviews. Historians cross-referencing American, Austrian, and German records have reconstructed the detailed chronology of cooperation and combat. This scholarly work has transformed the battle from obscure anecdote to properly documented historical incident, allowing for serious analysis of its military and ethical dimensions. Castle Itter represents the only documented instance of Americans and Germans fighting as formal allies during World War II. This unique status makes it fundamentally different from where other temporary ceasefires or local arrangements occurred. The coordinated defense against a common enemy established a military relationship that went beyond simple non-aggression to active cooperation. The battle's uniqueness continues to fascinate military scholars examining the boundaries of combatant relationships. Its study raises questions about how soldiers navigate conflicting loyalties when faced with greater threats, and how professional military training can create unexpected common ground between opponents. These inquiries extend beyond World War II to broader considerations of military ethics and conduct in complex combat situations. The historical treatment of the battle reflects larger patterns in how societies record and remember anomalous events during wartime. The initial minimization of German participation demonstrates how administrative systems struggle with incidents that challenge established categories. The gradual emergence of the full story shows how historical understanding evolves as researchers gain access to diverse sources and perspectives. This event's place in military history remains distinctive precisely because it defies standard classification. Unlike other unusual battlefield occurrences that involved temporary ceasefires or humanitarian exceptions, the Castle Itter defense required active tactical coordination between recent enemies. This cooperation created a military engagement without parallel in the annals of modern warfare, making it continually relevant to discussions of how soldiers define their responsibilities beyond official allegiances. Beyond the military anomaly, Castle Itter reveals profound truths about human nature placed under extreme pressure. Here were individuals from opposing ideologies who chose cooperation when confronted with a greater and more immediate evil. This decision required overcoming years of relentless propaganda, deep-seated national animosities, and the personal loss endured through years of brutal conflict. Each participant carried memories of friends and comrades lost to the very armies now standing beside them. The defenders represented a remarkable convergence of nationalities, military ranks, and personal backgrounds. American tank crews, Wehrmacht infantry, and French political figures found themselves sharing ammunition and defensive positions. They included career soldiers, former government ministers, and civilians never have crossed under normal circumstances. This diversity created initial challenges in coordination and communication that had to be overcome through necessity rather than formal procedure. Language barriers presented constant complications throughout the defense. With no common tongue among them, soldiers and prisoners developed efficient communication through gestures, simple phrases, and shared military understanding. A pointed finger could indicate a threat direction, an open palm might request ammunition, and nodding heads confirmed understanding. This improvised communication system proved surprisingly effective under fire, demonstrating human adaptability when survival depends on cooperation. Their cooperation grew not from shared ideology, but from fundamental human instincts, will to survive, and the impulse to protect others facing immediate danger. The Wehrmacht soldiers recognized the moral collapse of the cause they had served, while the Americans set aside regulations to prevent unnecessary death. This alignment of basic human decency against fanaticism created a temporary moral framework that transcended military affiliations and national boundaries. The battle demonstrated how ordinary people can achieve extraordinary results when united by clear common purpose. These were not specially selected operatives or elite forces, but regular soldiers and civilians thrust into an impossible situation. Their successful defense against professional attackers showed how shared determination can overcome numerical and material disadvantages. The coordination between tank crews, infantry, and armed civilians achieved what none could have accomplished separately. Courage and decency emerged consistently throughout the engagement, even as the situation grew increasingly desperate. Soldiers shared their last ammunition, protected comrades from different nations, and maintained discipline under intense fire. The decision to continue fighting alongside recent enemies required moral courage that went beyond physical bravery. These actions occurred without grand gestures or speeches, through simple choices made in moments of crisis. The real victory proved moral rather than military demonstration that humanity could transcend even total war's destructive logic. This temporary suspension of ideological conflict showed that basic human values could resurface when individuals. The battle's significance lies not in territory gained or enemies defeated, but in the evidence it provided of our capacity for cooperation across seemingly impossible divisions. This human dimension makes Castle Itter relevant beyond historical curiosity. It serves as a case study in how people navigate moral choice is under extreme pressure, how communication can bridge profound differences, and how shared humanity can override years of conditioning. The event reminds us that even in history's darkest hours, individuals retain the capacity for unexpected decency and cooperation. This lesson transcends its specific historical context, offering insights into human nature that remain applicable to conflicts and challenge, is far beyond World War II. The castle's stone walls witnessed not just a military engagement, but a demonstration of human flexibility and moral courage under the most trying circumstance is imaginable. The Battle of Castle Itter remains a profound anomaly, not just for its tactical outcome, but for what it revealed about human conscience in extremity. Here individual moral courage overrode systemic obedience. Men from opposing armies chose shared humanity over entrenched ideology, redefining duty when the rules of war dissolved. This brief alliance reminds us that even amid history's fiercest conflicts, ordinary people can enact extraordinary choices. It's a testament not to nations or armies, but to the enduring possibility of decency. In the shadow of collapse, they forged a fragile, fleeting and unforgettable victory for humanity itself.